Yeah, so thanks for having me here. Today I would like to share about some of my experiences, during my career while being on data initiatives, right, that I have. And also I would talk about a little bit about the stuff that was been also in the keynote before today, like some of this area more in deep, and also, also sharing the experience now, what I'm doing at Agile. First, let me introduce myself. So I'm currently with Agile. I'm co-heading the data team. We're around 25 people, and we belong to this big evil media company in Berlin. And before that, I used to work for Pivotal Labs, which is the consulting area of Pivotal, basically in a similar role, basically consulting big companies on their digitalization journey, whatever you call it. And yeah, I was also young and foolish. I joined Accenture once at a time. Just kidding. It was an experience worthwhile doing this. But yeah, it's kind of a different way of what I'm doing right now in the corporate world. And yeah, so usually, I have this animation, but since we don't have Google presentation here, everything is there, so no animations. Usually, I give a lot of technical talks. I'm a very hardcore data scientist, but since I'm management, there's no mathematics involved today, and hopefully no big data. So let me start with a situation that most of you probably know, right? So you probably at the start of a year, maybe your company right at the stage, right? You go in the office of your manager, right? And the manager is like, hey, what do you want, So, and he, suddenly he read something on, for example, the Handelsblatt or whatever, right, during the weekend. And he's like, yeah, I read about this thing, blockchain, super cool, it would change everything. And everyone is talking about this. And yeah, and then you yourself, you have no idea what this is, right? And you're like, okay, what exactly is it? Then he already starts to talk about AI and all these new buzzwords and new topics that you have, right? And if you think about this, 3 years ago when I joined, when I had my first job, everyone was basically into big data. There was like the big wave of big data. Everyone's like starting to talk about let's use this data lake, right? So we can harness the power, let's just build it and then everything will be solved. The problem is, actually, this is the reality. So most of the corporations 3 years ago and even now, I would say, are not really ready for any digital transformation or whatever they do. And it's not about the tool set or the culture itself. It's about like a combination of all the factors all together. And usually what I saw in the past is, most of this corporation, like even 3 years ago, they started to invest into a lot of things. So they put millions in buying tools, right? So they built this big Hadoop cluster, right? Spending millions on that. They hired a lot of consultancies, so basically getting into it, right? Maybe they also built a digital lab, right? So a digital lab somewhere. Now, if you look in Berlin, last year, like the investing into digital labs is immense. When I see that again, I think last year 4 or 5 of these new labs started somewhere out of there. And it's very shiny. So as this picture, everything looks green, everything is fine. Like, you start with great hopes, great expectation, you have this AI first strategy, you're going to be like, yeah, we're going to be the next Google, right? But the problem is, from what I've seen so far, and what I've seen from most of the corporations, big corporation, is that 2 years later, 3 years later, nothing gets released, no products get out, right? Spending millions on, I don't know, SaaS, Hadoop, whatever, right? And they're not making use of it, right? And the moral of the story, so in the keynote they had 10 points, I only have 3 points, so I want to make it shorter. From my understanding is that in Germany we still have a very hierarchical organization in some way, so most of the decisions are still made on top. So I see so far that most of the data projects or digitalization projects is, I would say, just a side project, right? It's not really like at the core part of any company. And usually people who are making the decision are actually on the top, and they are not making the right decision. So that means they're not the right people on the top to make that decision. And the second thing is, you have a lot of companies who think that they just can use a lot of money, right, and then just put it into people, also might hire expensive consultancies, but the problem is it also didn't really help at all. And the final conclusion for me was like also over my career is that these companies were not able actually to create a culture, right, where you can fail, where you have a very agile culture, where you have a culture where basically you can create software, you can create products, right? Like for example, Google or Amazon does. And today's talk, I would like to talk more about this culture. I call it MVP culture. I think in the US or somewhere it's more prevalent than here in Germany. I think, in most of the slides, even the slides before, you always have kind of a touch of doing this, right? But this is always kind of a naming for culture or a team that we want to build on. Yeah. Let me start with the definition of MVP. So I just took this definition from Eric Ries, who I used to work with. So he was on the payrolls of Pivotal as well, like me. And he says that a minimum viable product is essentially a version of a new product, which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of a valid learning. So basically, it's the minimum solution that you want to build out, right, where you can just release it to the market and then test it. Since it's very abstract, I took a very simple example, and it actually is pretty important because I've just hired a couple of employees, and in Berlin it's not so easy anymore to look for a flat because everyone seems to come to Berlin because they like it somehow. Berlin is actually still very poor, but very sexy in some way, and also because of the tech that is coming up. So, situation, you're new in Berlin, and the problem, you just need a roof over your head, right? So what is the minimum solution that you needed to solve this problem? Well, most corporation probably was like, let's do some architecture, right? Let's do some data governance. Let's figure out what we need, right? The right people. So a big plan, right? That sometimes takes like 1 or 2 years, right? Like you do all this documentation, you know these concepts. Maybe you just need to write kind of a concept basically to hire some consultancies, right? So you're not really creating any value at all, and actually you don't really have any plan sometimes what you do, right? And then basically, yeah, nothing gets solved. The simple solution actually, okay, this is probably irrealistic, but usually when you would do is, for example, MVP, easy, right? You don't need to write any documentation. You just go into the supermarket, right, buy a tent, and hey, here, you can use a tent. This will solve your problem. Of course, nowadays, probably you would take an Airbnb or, I don't know, like whatever, right, like a hostel or something like that. And then, when it goes on, you're in a city, you can get a container, right? And then finally, basically, you can create your own villa or whatever you do while you're in Berlin. So this is basically, MVP for adventurous people, and should give you a simple idea what MVP means. And I would also relate this more to data science, machine learning more later. So just have this in mind. So what is the simple solution on this ground? So MVP, so why is it important? Does anyone know this company? 3? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, they died already, so probably most of you guys probably won't know it. So this company is called Juicero. It's a company that was founded a couple of years ago by a guy who himself thought that he was the new Steve Jobs in some way. They actually raised a lot of money, so like around 120 millions of US dollars. And they got this money. They set in their cool lab somewhere in Silicon Valley, right? And then 2 years later, they released this nice, well-designed machine, so white, like the Apple in some way. And what does it do? It basically you have these juice packages here, right? And then basically this juice machine just squeeze up some juice, right? For a very expensive price, of course, because it's cool. It's well designed, right? So it was released for $700. Very expensive, right? And the juice packages, they were like around $6 to $8. So quite okay, I would say. I mean, still much more than a smoothie that you get in Berlin for €4, but still at a very decent price. The biggest problem was that people has to buy to this machine basically to use these packages, but that was not the case. So basically, people realized, oh, I just can buy the package and then I use my bare hand to squeeze out the juices, right? So that was a very, very simple thing in a way, but they just sat in the lab, maybe the digital lab, and then figure out something and never release it, never saw it in real customers, right? And then basically 2 years later, they came out with a product, no one bought it, and yeah, end of the story, they died. Very simple. Yeah, so why is MVP so important for us? If you think about this example before, all the success stories in some way, right? They have some kind of pattern as how you basically release a product. And basically, if you set it into 2 dimension, it's about the risk that you incur and the time that you want to go into the market, right? So nowadays, nowadays it's very important to do a lot of experiments, a lot of things going on, like release your product as soon as possible, right? To basically get customer feedback, because we're in a digital space, so we're not. I would say not, for example, for the company that I work for, we're not in kind of offline retail business anymore. We're in an online business. That means for us, it is very important to test new features, to test new product features, to release as much as possible. So to understand if the product what we are creating is really on the right track, right? If it is really used by the customer. And at the end of the day, machine learning is kind of also involved into this. Because if you think about machine learning as well, right? So in the first keynote, Alex and forgot the second name. Sorry. Also Alex Square. They talk about data products, right? So I started to set up machine learning already as a data product, right? So I don't see machine learning just like any statistical feature or like a new department, but I see this as a component as a data product. And if we think that machine learning, or if we consider this also as a product, why don't we consider it as a normal product that people are already kind of releasing as already, right? Like Airbnb or Amazon or other successful companies. And within this, there are 3 dimensions that is very important for me that I started during my career, which is like, I define it as the minimum viable model, the minimum viable platform, and the minimum viable data product. So let's start with the minimum viable model. So if I, in terms of thinking in a minimum viable model, right? So if you think about like maybe at your company, right? You might have some data teams, right? They just started to do things. Maybe within these teams, right? They realize, oh yeah, deep learning is cool, right? And we got to use it. So in this case, for most of the problems, however, like classification models or regression or clustering or solving a machine learning problem for various use cases, you don't really need to start with the most difficult problem. Basically, in this case, let's just take a classification problem that just predict, for example, hey, this is he's going to churn or not to churn, right? And in this case, it's just enough to just take the basic simple model, like a logistic regression model, the very most simplest model actually in this case. Of course, if you talk about to hardcore data scientists nowadays, they're like, what? You're still using logistic regression? That's so 90s. This is just nothing, right? and then, but in a business context, right? It's not about only like doing hardcore data science, but it's about relating the business problem to the data science problem as well. And this was already also talked in the last talks before. And if you start with this kind of model, right, you already have kind of a basic model, and then from there upon, you can like iterate on that, right? So you can use, for example, a tree-based model, right, which is more complicated but also more powerful in a way. And then finally, you can start to use some cool deep learning as well in sense of way, right? And then if you're doing something like this, right, it will be also kind of I don't know if GPTR is kind of playing in my hands with that, right? But it's simply that you have a simple model that has some exploratory power in that, but also you can use deep learning at the end of the day at all, right? But of course, this MVP model is not basically. I don't do this all the time in sense of way, right? It always depends on the problem. So what I'm saying today about things that is not like a general recipe that you have to apply for everything. Every problem is specific in a way, right? So for example, if you think about image classification or object detection in some way, right? I would never start with something like a logistic regression. So I would rather straight go to convolutional neural networks, right? And in the last, it was the last talk? No, the last talk before, where I talked that deep learning is a black box model. I would say I would partially agree with this. So if you think about convolutional neural networks or some of the networks, there is some basic understanding of what a specific hidden layer means in a way, right? So this is not always the case. I think if someone comes to it and tell you this, you got to be some kind of critical about this. Yeah. So this is one of the slides that I actually really like. Also in the first talk, you had this discussion that people started to buy the first data lake, right? They built their Hadoop cluster in this case, right? And they wanted to get all the data together, right? And then over the time, they realized, oh, cool, now we have big data, so we need things like Apache Spark, right? And then we put it together. And then finally, like now Tensorflow is in, so Tensorflow has been in now for 2 years. They might start also to invest into Tensorflow and also technologies like Kubernetes and things like that, right? But the thing is, if you look about this span of the time, it can take up to 2 to 3 years, right, where you don't really create any values. And basically, most of the projects that I've seen also so far is they start to do some ETL jobs, they put some kind of data in their data lakes in there, but then they realize the data is not good enough. So the data is not really that they need for this, right? Sometimes you have like machine learning use cases where you don't really have the data at hand, but you have to think of where could you get the data or how would you label the data, right? So there's many, many possible ways to do this nowadays. And my approach and the approach that I've been doing also with Agile is we're doing a multi-cloud strategy. So it means we have also on-premise a cloud, right? But this is more using for like deployment of applications, containers, right? But in terms of data, why don't we use like Amazon, right? Amazon Web Service. They all have the cloud service ready. They have EMR, right? Which is another Spark. They have Kinesis, which is another tool service for Kafka, right? So you have all the tools available basically, and you don't need to hire another guy basically to set up this thing. So data can be very fast in a way, and basically you can test out your projects, right? And then you realize, hey, okay, this makes sense, and so I need to add more and more layer in that. So it's very elastic in a way. Of course, there's not always, I would say, full advantage in that. So the disadvantage is very costly, right? So if you think in terms of on-premise, you already paid it in a way, right? So you basically just need to use it so that you get full utilization of your cluster. But with this strategy, basically, I know what I need in the future, what I need on-premise. So in the future, we might think to basically do some of the stuff on premise, right? For the use cases that are already working, the stuff that is in production, right? So that we know what we need to pay. So we don't need to pay 1 or 2 millions, right? Maybe we need only to pay a proportion of the amount that basically is useful for the use cases that we do in the future. Yeah. So this is, for example, a use case that we've built within only 6 weeks. So it's about price alert automation. So at Idealo, you're able to set up your price alert, right? And if the price that you set on Idealo gets triggered by a certain amount, you basically get a notification that you can buy it from the shop. The biggest problem is, with dynamic pricing or pricing is that prices change so fast. So everything is not correct, or maybe the shops delivers a wrong price. And we basically have a very, very big team that basically takes care of whether the price is correct or not. And so when we started with this project, right, most of the projects we do is sometimes we have the data or sometimes we don't have, right? In this case, we didn't have the data, but we had a big team basically that is collecting the data. So we built a tool which is called Pablo that basically is a front end based on React and basically just to collect the data, right, in some way. And then afterwards, we built our model, we classified, we evaluated it, and then basically we figured out there was a pattern, right? We put it in a production. It was very easy. We built a very simple Flask application. We deployed it on Kubernetes, OpenShift, and that took us less than 3 days. So we built a lot of, I would say, sample use cases that you can where you can deploy application very fast. And then for the training, we're using mostly Amazon for this. So this is basically the multi-cloud strategy that I've just talked about. So I don't think, I think in Germany we still have this problem that not every company understands how to put models or put data like into production. It's very difficult because you all have these IT securities. Maybe you don't have the right platform in a way, right? But I think in this case, you as a company has to change in the way, right? You have to think like, okay, if you really want to be fast, if the technology is not fast, you can't be fast anyway because you can just talk about this stuff. Yeah. So coming to the one of the last point in MVP, I took up with a couple of examples in terms of use cases. So this case is chatbots, one of my favorite topic because they are pretty hot at the moment, right? So I think a lot of data scientists, getting like some data sets maybe on Kaggle, right? And then they build their LSTM model, and then they just put it out on Twitter, right? Collecting data from very evil people, and then at the end of the day we had this guy, right? So this was like a bot that was created by Microsoft, and who actually knows this bot? Yeah, okay, a few people. So basically, they release it on Twitter, right? And then he was basically he was very evil at the front of that. And the problem with chatbots is a very, very specific problem. So if you think about chatbots, right, they only work for a specific use case, and most people really don't understand in this way, right? A better approach would be there's this approach in product management which is called Wizard of Oz, right? So Wizard of Oz is basically, in this case, you're building a chatbot with no bot, basically. So you're imitating, basically, you're putting a human in front of the bot, right? Understanding what are people actually asking for, right? What are actually people asking in your platform? Basically collecting, hey, can we build basically a good chatbot onto that, right? Because if you have a platform and people are strolling around, or for example on YouTube, people are very racist and they put a lot of very, very hateful words in that, right? Then it is very, very difficult for the model to learn in the future, right? So you need to understand what are you really actually building for. And basically this would be a better approach. So you collect the data, you can build the model, right? And then you build a very, very specific problem in terms of your chatbot, right? If you think about this AGI, like artificial general intelligence, right? Like a chatbot which basically can answer everything. If some company would come to you and tell you things like that, maybe like IBM Watson, I would very doubt that they are able to do this. Another example is recommendation. So recommendation is very important for us. It's I think very important for many companies, right? Here in this case, it is very important that recommendation is just not a sum of one algorithm, right? So recommendation is a lot. It's like a variety of different products at the end of the day. And in this case, you don't really start, like with simple like similarity measures, right? And then you go to matrix factorization, and maybe then you do some deep learning on recommendation, right? So this is not really the case, because if you, for example, look at Amazon, right? Amazon is not famous only for one recommendation, they're famous for multiple recommendations. So if you look at their website, they have top products, the most 50 products last seen by someone, right? So this is, how to start this is basically to test one of the recommendation, set up your A and B testing, right? Set up your online versus offline testing well, right? Test your recommendation algorithm versus, because there's no truth in terms of recommendation, because it's a very subjective measure in a way, because everyone is different in some way. So it's about basically the algorithm itself, the tool itself, but also the phrasing for yourself, right? And where you actually put it on your recommendation. And also recommendation is not like, this typical cool algorithm that you do, like this, for example, the state of the art is low rank matrix factorization, but also sometimes it's just very, very basic recommendation that you get out of it. Yeah. So self-driving cars. So since we're in Munich, there's a lot of car companies here. Actually, there was an animation, so probably you already know what this is, right? Does anyone know what this is here? No? Okay, this is actually the early days of self-driving cars. So that was in the 1960s. That was Ford. So Ford already 50, 60 years ago, right, they started to test out whether self-driving cars as a product was be useful, right? So basically, they put a guy on the car, and then they put a seat, right, on his head, and then he was driving. And then they drove through, I think it was Chicago, to saw the effect of how would people perceive actually self-driving cars, right? Before actually now building all the models that they do right now. So if you think about this, right, this is something that we've never seen actually, but this has been done in the past. And I haven't seen any company here in Germany doing this. It would be cool. And it's very simple, right? It's not difficult. It's very MVP-ish, very simple to test the idea of a self-driving car. Yeah. Who knows what this is? What is this? Yeah. Right, that's correct. So what he just explained is correct. So this basically is a fake airplane, and these are people on the island. So it was during the Second World War, and basically the Americans, they put a lot of supplies and it's called cargo. So they put the cargoes onto this island, and basically after the war, they left the island, and the islanders, they were pretty shocked because wow. When the U.S. guys, on the airplane, they did this and this, basically, and then the airplanes came down, right, and then put all the cargoes, and the cargoes, they had all the supplies, this great magic, and the islanders, when the Americans left the islands, they were shocked because wow, no, the gods are not there anymore, so we just build the airplane and they wander away again, right? So basically, that they would come back again and take the cargoes back, right? And basically, this effect is called the cargo cult. So it's a cargo cult, and basically, this is a lab that I've also been to in Berlin. It's one of the digital labs, and for me, like most of the digital labs here are actually cargo cult. So they are not really like thinking in a proper way, because if you think about most of the digital labs, what is the core point? They're very shiny, right? So they are put in a very good, nice place, right? They have their Club Mati, you have Kicker, you have all the shiny MacBooks, it's great, right? It's a great way to work in. And also in this nice factory buildings that you have, right? So who would not work there, right? It's a great place. But if you think about this, right? If they think about this, why are they doing digital labs? Because actually most German companies copying Silicon Valley companies, right? So if you think about Google, Amazon, or Facebook, when I worked with Pivotal, I was in Silicon Valley a lot, and I visited like the Googleplex a lot, and it's very cool, in the Google campus. You can drive with a Google bike and all this stuff. And I had a friend working at Google, right? So I could get in. So really, really nice. But the problem is that most of the German companies don't realize that companies like Google or Facebook had to buy those stuff outside of San Francisco because it was so freaking expensive, right? It was just so expensive that they just had to go out of San Francisco and also buying this kind of stuff, right? So it's not because they were forced to. I think most of them would stay in San Francisco because, if you're in a Bay Area, you probably be in San Francisco because out there, I think it's a little boring, right? And you need a car. It's not very cool if you don't have a car not in San Francisco. So yeah, for me, actually, one of the core things that I learned doing so far is actually the culture that it built is the core reason, right? So the culture at Google, the culture at Facebook, this engineering culture that they build up, right? They do pair programming, they have CI/CD system, they have TD system. They are built basically to create digital products in a way, right? And so far, we're kind of lacking this in a way to build this kind of culture because we're not used to it, because we rather came from a more industrial application instead of a very tech background. And the second idea is building on the top of the MVP approach, right? So basically, it's less hypothesis-driven experimentation, right? It's more about like, okay, we have this great plan, we have 2 years budget for it, let's use 2 years, and then, we just build on that, right? We hire these consultancies, but we're not really testing small ideas, putting out things. And then the third point is, I think one of the first talk in keynote also talked about this, that you have to see machine learning as a product, right? So machine learning is ingrained into a product. It's just not, I'm basically part of the data management team. I'm heading it up, right? But I'm not building up, like a specific core data science team that stays in the lab. So the way how I scale in the future is that, I hope that in 2 or 3 years, I can get rid of the data science team, right? And that every software engineer, every product owner, every designer, knows what data science is, right? That you ingrain this into every product team that you do. And this is how, for example, companies like Amazon or Google works, that in every division that you do, they have data science capacity, that every software engineer can do it together nowadays. Yes, and coming to my last point, on also a very important point, as I mentioned, the right people is also important, right? So I think a lot of decisions nowadays at also very big companies are made by people who have been serving in a company for quite a while. It's not bad. I mean, they deserve to be there, right? But in terms of a new area, like a digital space, it's very difficult, right? And especially if you're a young person coming in, right? And then you have to work under this person, right? Who has no clue about what blockchain or AI or what is, right? You feel very, very, I would say, depressed in some way, right? And you feel very alone in your, conquer of doing things, right? And basically, for me, hiring the right people is core, right? And I just put one of the job ads from a very big company that called Deutsche Telekom, right? And basically, everyone is here of us trying to get some good people, right? But the problem is most of the companies, they're just very still brand oriented. Who the fuck is brand oriented nowadays? In Berlin, if no one comes to Berlin, if no one lets you use your technical stack, no one is going to this company anymore, right? So we have the choice basically to decide who we want to work for, right? It's not about the company itself anymore. The company itself has changed in some way. In this case, for example, you have to go to Bonn. I've been to Bonn twice. It's not a good place to be. You have to have 10 years, of experience. 10 years. Who has 10 years in data science and IoT? No one has it. And then, I don't know who wrote this stuff, but you need Python, Java, R, Scala, and JavaScript. So technical languages that are not related at all to any of the stuff that a machine learner or a data science needs to do. And also, doing some configuration of Hadoop, if they find this unicorn, I'm very happy for them. It's a great play. Yeah, so coming to the end. As I said, my presentation, there's no right or wrong. I think there's a lot of controversy in here, maybe from my side, also from my experience in some way. I think not all the things that I say works, of course, for your company or in the way that how you do it, right? Some companies are at the start of their digital transformation. Some of them are very far away, right? I think this is just food for thought. So just take it into you and think about this. If the words that I say are kind of working for you, or maybe in a different way, right? And of course, but still try to work on that, right? Have an MVP culture and this failing fast culture. And yeah, of course, hiring is difficult. So you as a company need to change if you want to get the best people. It's the war for talent, I tell you. I got 100 applications within 5 months. It was not, I would say, it was a very difficult thing to get the best people, because nowadays everyone is a data scientist. Very difficult to make the decision, so you need to change as well, basically to get the best people, to attract the talents as well. So, yeah, thanks for your attention. And is there questions time?
Thank you.